I saw CXC respond recently to the volcano erupting in our sister country. And I have seen responses that suggest that this is, or that say very clearly to me that having a CARICOM-based institution that tests and measures and examines where we are and how we're getting along is useful. And I'm very grateful, and I'd ask you to convey our gratitude.
Dear CXC, as I reflect on my journey with you and the journey of thousands of teachers across the Caribbean, the words of the late Prime Minister of Barbados seem apt. The Right Honorable Errol Barrow, in his address to members at the inaugural meeting of the Caribbean Examinations Council in 1973, posited, "Our teachers will set examination papers for the testing of Caribbean pupils in what they themselves have taught. Our teachers will mark and assess the examination work done by Caribbean pupils and recommend pass or fail. The institution of this council, therefore, gives the Caribbean teacher an opportunity to come of age, to take over fully the education of the young people of the Caribbean in the same way that the Caribbean community is taking its economic destinies into its own hands." Needless to say, these words seem prophetic 50 years later. The annual script marking exercise is a huge training ground for thousands of the region's teachers. This great exercise helps teachers to realize the commonalities that run through each of our contributing territory. As they meet and discuss, they develop a greater understanding of teaching methods and strategies that are employed throughout the region. Markers have acquired a wealth of experience in various disciplines. The marking exercise was much more than academia. In 40 years of our existence, the face-to-face modality provided the opportunity for unmatched integration. Lasting friendships were forged, permanent unions were solidified, and the beauty and wonder of the Caribbean landscape were highlighted and explored. We thank you, and we say without fear of contradiction that you, CXC, have created the strongest bond among Caribbean people.
I want to begin by saying that the number 50 is very significant. There are two numbers that are very significant, 40, 50. Those two numbers, one marks a generation, meaning that we've passed a generation, and 50, as we see in this particular program here, speaks of Jubilee. Jubilee is a time when we recover everything that was lost. It is a time of new beginnings. 50 is symbolic of new beginnings. It is symbolic of resetting. And so it is only fitting that we celebrate 50 years of existence with CXC. There was a time when CXC was not taken seriously. In those days, we just had a couple of subjects being presented by CXC. And so I think today we have some 37 subjects presented by CXC. So we have seen the trajectory and we've seen the movement of this very critical organization. CXC was implemented as a result of the need for us to have examinations that are in touch with reality, in touch with the Caribbean reality and the Caribbean identity. There was a time when many of us wrote the General Certificate of Education coming out of London. And so many of those examinations, they were set in the context of the British. But as a Caribbean people, we have our own cultures, we have our own agendas, and therefore we needed a body that could concentrate and focus our people in a direction that will be conducive to the development of the Caribbean. My journey with CXC, like Ms. Fung, it started in 1993 as a school teacher. I became a marker of CXC, and I marked for 13 years. And after marking for 13 years, I became a table leader for 2 years. So in the actual process, I spent 15 years in the actual process of marking. And then I moved to becoming a member of the Final Awards Committee. That is the committee that determines the final grade of every student, every child, and became a member also of the council. And so my journey is somewhere around 30 years with CXC, and it still continues because Dr. Wayne Wesley and I think we have like passion to see the development of our young people in a real sense, and therefore we have these little power-outs, if I could say that, from time to time.
So, it is my distinct pleasure to join you today as we celebrate our 50th anniversary serving the region. On behalf of CXC, I would like to thank the Minister of Education of the Cooperative of Republic of Guyana for hosting this event to celebrate our organization's milestone. We are truly honored. I have been enjoying this morning's proceedings, and I am touched by the gracious remarks, especially coming from Amsterdam, New Amsterdam Secondary. I'm not sure if I really need to continue because they've basically covered everything that I have here to present. So thank you, well done. It's clear that the teacher has done her research and you have put in quite a bit to bring that to us. I truly appreciate it. So we understand that due to distance, it is not possible for all our stakeholders to join us face-to-face in all our 50th anniversary celebration. So I am thrilled that you decided to host your own event to help us celebrate. Guyana has always been a firm supporter of the work of the Caribbean Examination Council in terms of what we're doing across the region, and the Ministry of Education continues to adopt new subjects and qualifications to equip their leaders, their learners, with the necessary tools to excel and to further Guyana's development. Dr. the Honorable Priya Manickchand, we thank you for your ministerial and governmental participation in support of CXC's vision. No, I can't stand here and speak about CXC and Guyana without speaking about or mentioning the impressive legacy, and I'm stressing it, impressive legacy, because it's a legacy of student excellence in performance. For several decades, students from Guyana have demonstrated performances worthy of merit in various qualifications. I congratulate your teachers and students on their hard work and dedication. Please give yourself a round of applause. Now, in 1973, governments of majority of the English-speaking Caribbean territories, under the chairmanship of Dr. later Sir Roy Marshall, Vice Chancellor of the University of the West Indies, presented as well as signed the agreement establishing the Caribbean Examinations Council at its inaugural council meeting in Barbados. The heads of government were driven by a shared vision of Caribbean unity and a shared dream of a regional examination body which would serve the developmental needs of the region with assessments which were relevant to the Caribbean experience. Then, in 1979, our first examinations, the Caribbean Secondary Education Certificate, everybody knows it, CSEC, were offered in 5 subjects. These CSEC examinations were followed by the Caribbean Advanced Proficiency Examination, CAPE, qualification, and this was in 1998. The Caribbean Certificate of Secondary Level Competence, CCSLC, and the Caribbean Vocational Qualification, CVQ, in 2007, and the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment, CPEA, in 2012. For the past 50 years, CXC has remained steadfastly dedicated to serving the region through the development of the human capital of our Caribbean people, through partnerships for global competitiveness. And as I said before, New Amsterdam has captured my speech. This is our motivation as we work towards the vision of a digitally transformed enterprise providing high quality, relevant, and globally recognized educational services.
CXC at 50. A landmark time for all of us, not only as an institution, as the student said, but in the Caribbean. And prior to that, we had, as you heard, the history, which I don't intend to go into. We had O-levels and A-levels, which many of our parents and grandparents and so on did. And then CXC came up with this Caribbean exam that was going to be localized to our contexts and our students and our history and our geography and our languages and our realities here in the region, that would bring us, I think they hoped too, closer to the integration that CARICOM was established to try to foster. And over the years, I think we have seen very commendable efforts by CXC as an institution to try to respond to various needs. Guyana has, in many ways, perhaps not boastfully enough, and we're supposed to be humble and do all these other nice things Tiffany said about me, celebrated our own contribution to that movement. And I have always found the body very responsive and timely. I remember when we said to CXC somewhere around 2012 that Guyana was particularly interested in pursuing Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese, not just Portuguese, as a subject that would be certified and recognized, that an entire team came down and we immediately started looking at that. And now Portuguese is a subject offered by CXC, not taken only by Guyanese, although Guyanese remain in the majority. And we were thinking at the time our proximity to Brazil and how important it would be for us to communicate effectively in business, in education, socially, and otherwise. And now more than ever, so it took a few years to come on board, and we have been doing this for a few years, but I would say with ease that you're going to see the benefits of that in a few years to come when the relationship and the trade relationships improve and expand. And so I think as an organization, I saw CXC respond to our need locally when we had to postpone or change the dates for some examinations in or around 2015, when our very sensational local politics trumped the children's interests at the time. And I saw CXC respond recently to the volcano erupting in our sister country. And I have seen responses that suggest that this is, or that say very clearly to me that having a CARICOM-based institution that tests and measures and examines where we are and how we're getting along is useful. And I'm very grateful, and I'd ask you to convey our gratitude. If we were in doubt, I think the time to have measured the responsiveness of the Caribbean Examinations Council was during COVID and even after COVID. And we saw that body come up not by consensus, because the closed door meetings to get to the place of the announcement is usually could get violent. But I saw that body come up with measures that allowed the region's children not to have their education interrupted. And those things sound like small measures, but while we were going through COVID, it was everything to us. Now we're out of COVID, relatively speaking, when you compare to where we were. We would have had children now, when we were all here without masks and sanitizers, unable to graduate and wondering where were the adults amongst them, where was the response? And that response spoke specifically, if ever we were in doubt, to the versatility of this institution to respond to the region's peculiar needs. You have seen how we ourselves have responded to CXC. Guyana continues to, in local parlance, lick up. I don't know if you know that from Jamaica, that term. We have our top Cape student here. We have the reason you don't see our top CSEC student is because they are, he is, and the second student also, they are in another county, a few hours away, because I'm not based in the capital city of Georgetown. And or the student who would be second at Cape is in even another county. And we have been able to move our own results locally. From when I wrote CSEC, and I didn't realize I was that special at the time, or I think I would have been a little bit more useful. Only 19% of us passed mathematics when I wrote CSEC in 1992. And I think at the time it was even less. Sorry, I think 19% passed English and 15% passed mathematics when I wrote in 92. We're now at a place through mammoth efforts where we're crossing over 60s for English, and still too low, but way higher in mathematics, where we're between 40 and 50. Not unlike the rest of the region. So while we are where the rest of the region is in those two core subjects, we didn't come from where the rest of the region came in those two core subjects. And sometimes these numbers get lost in the noise that surrounds these types of conversations. Much of it political, frankly. And we fail to celebrate, because of that noise, the human effort that went into making those changes. Teachers, when we, in or around when I wrote CSEC, we had about 30% of our teachers trained. 30% teachers trained were giving us 19% pass in English. We now have between 70 to 75% of our teachers trained, and I say between because it fluctuates every year, and we have 60% passes in English. And I say that to say that there's a direct correlation between investing in our people through training teachers and looking at how that reflects in our human resource, our children. And there's a direct correlation between those two. And it took mammoth efforts by the people in political office, by the head teachers, by the teachers, by their families, by the students and their families to take us from 19% to 60-something%. And we mustn't fail to celebrate that, because for me, that is a good indication of where we can go and what else we can do. We're on a trajectory. Mrs. Fung is looking at me cross-eyed right now. We're on a, like this girl didn't take any of the training we gave her. We're on a trajectory right now to make sure by 2025, 100% of our teachers are trained or are in training. And that is requiring, and I could tell you, that is requiring an unexpected effort to try to get to that place, just to try to kick out the training and take that across the country. We're at a place where we hope that every single child of secondary age will be able to access secondary education. So we're on a massive build-out school program. So right now, while in Georgetown, we are relatively good with universal secondary education, although we have a lot of overcrowding, which will change. In the hinterland communities, we do not have seats for children because of the geography of the country. And, you know, when we were doing COVID, I said to CXC, you have to listen to Guyana a little bit differently. When Barbados says we're going online, you're talking about people who can drive from one end of the island to the other in 2 hours. When Guyana says we're going online, 90% of the country has no access to online. So we had to come up with different measures, different strategies to engage our children. And so same thing with putting them in physical schools. We have villages that are 3 hours apart in driving from each other, and each of them has 10 children that need secondary school. And so how do we cater for all the children of this country so that everybody has the same opportunities Atishta or Utam, the names you heard here, or Saskia have? And that is the big effort that is unfolding right now. We are trying very hard to make sure we provide, and you know, I was having this conversation recently, that we provide all primary children and all secondary children and all nursery children with all the textbooks they need. And so before the end of September this year, all of you here, I don't think I'm seeing primary kids, but all the secondary children here will have all the textbooks you need at no cost to yourself. And so I'm actually giving you homework. Check out which other Caribbean country does that. Check it out. Because you would think this is normal and everybody gives textbooks for free, and it is not. It is not. And many people say, well, you have oil money now, but you will also, if you look back at your history, in 2014, we had saturated the entire country's population with all the math and English books. It calls for strategic planning, a will, and a desire to get to that place. Not necessarily always money. You need money. But getting resources to children and helping families along the way is as important to us as building the infrastructure that we need. So before July, we have a program where every child, not every home, will receive $40,000 as a grant to help with outfitting the children for school in September. These are all aimed at making sure we can continue our excellence and our excellent performance at CSEC and at CAPE. But we've gone past that. We are now talking about making sure, while we maintain academic excellence, that every child exits high school with at least exposure to at least one musical instrument so we could have many Colwins and many New Amsterdams and many Queen's College playing students, because this is a privilege. Having a Mrs. Edwards and a Mr. McDonald and being able to stand here and play on the steel pan is a privilege. Not many schools have that ability. We want to make sure every student exiting school has exposure, and I'm saying exposure as distinct from passes at CXC. Exposure to one musical instrument at least, one foreign language at least, one TVET, one sport, and a strong sense of volunteerism. And that's a program we're trying to build out. And if the children here are anything like my children, well, my daughter, she says, well, how do you expect me to do well if they force me to do this and force me to do that? I should be enjoying this. So we're looking to see how, while we get compliance in rolling it out, which means student participation, that we don't burden you with trying to get 90s and 80s and 100s and so on, because what we want is to give you the confidence and skill that knowing to play a musical instrument will give you, and the happiness and the quality it will bring to your life, without burdening you with whether you got it right or didn't get it right. How do you mark art? Van Gogh would be disappointed in us to know that we had standards of art we were looking for, because art for one student may very well be different for another. What is beautiful to one may be very ugly to another, or frightening to another person. And so even as we pursue the conversation about how we will continue unapologetically, unreservedly, how we will continue our academic excellence across the region, Guyana is looking to do and build out a more rounded, more complete student that will give our next generation coping skills I think we may feel. So we may have been failed regarding what we took away. So I want to say to all of you this morning, with CXC, and I don't think these are the for self-examination, but I think CXC can also reflect on its own, some of its own weaknesses. And so if we thought we could have legitimately not have 18 SBAs per subject during COVID and still put out a whole child, it baffles me as to why post-COVID, having learned that, we would return to 18 SBAs. So those are some of the real conversations we need to have. Are you really getting out of the 18 SBAs what you want, which is children having a practical understanding, or because of the short time that we're doing it, people are burdened, or young people are now burdened with getting this done rather than learning the skill you intended, because you haven't changed anything at the paper 2 or paper 1 level, but you've loaded them up with 18 SBAs. And I believe if you're going to put in 18 SBAs to get a more practical student exiting, then you have to drop something else somewhere else, or else all you did was burden the young people of the region unnecessarily. And like I said, I think so, and I think if the conversation is really expanded, you'll see that people don't mind the SBAs. I think the kids would love the SBAs if they didn't feel the pressure to do all of it excellently. So not all of the SBAs, I mean SBAs and paper 1 and paper 2. So the SBAs were intended, if we look at what was the intent when they came out, to give a practical exposure to the subject, then what was reduced because you're doing it in the same time. So those are some of the conversations I think that should not take long. When we were forced as a region to make quick decisions to serve those we swore to, our children, we were able to come up with good solutions for the COVID response. And so to serve the next set of children, we shouldn't take too long in some of these discussions. And I have sat in the seat CXC would probably be sitting in every new suggestion to people who are accustomed to something. When we were trying to consolidate the curriculum for NGSE, everybody said to me, we can't drop this, we can't drop that, it's important. Of course it's important, that's why you put it there. I don't think you were wasting time when you put it there. But the reality is our kids have been out of school for 2 years, so they didn't get to exposure to this important thing. And so I got a big resistance about what we could drop and what we didn't drop. And it was the mothers and parents, I want to say mostly mothers, they had 1 or 2 fathers, that in the ministry who were serving as officers that said, no, we're dropping this. Because parents understood better, I think, than the experts in the field, what that was doing and what it meant. So I want to say this morning that even as we celebrate the lengths we've gone to, and we have gone far as a region, I think we do have a great opportunity to look at how we could make sure this CXC body caters to, fosters over the entire secondary period, and then produces at the end of it children who are competing even better across the world. I want to congratulate those who are at the helm now, those who came before, and to say to all the stakeholders, parents, students, teachers, administrators of schools, not only here in Guyana, but across the region, we thank you and God bless you all.